Ruben Amorim is attempting to implement the exact same system that brought him so much success with Sporting at Man United. And while they did pick up an incredible comeback win against Man City at the weekend, I think Amorim will be the first to admit that this team still has a long way to go. And in today's video, I want to focus on the main challenges that Amorim is facing at Man United, from the positioning of the wingbacks to their attacks essentially being too quick. Let's take a look. So to set the picture of what Amorim is having to deal with this season, I'm going to be using a new statistic that Soccerment have been working on that I've had the privilege of helping out with some of the research and some of the data that goes into this metric. And this metric attempts to differentiate teams that play with a more relational style compared to those that play slightly more positional football. So in very simple terms, this metric works by taking the average touch map of every player and considering the standard deviation of where these touches took place during the match. So for example, if a player takes a lot of touches around the pitch and deviates a lot from his starting position, then he's considered to be a more fluid player in nature. While if the player's standard deviation from his starting position is not too high, then he's naturally considered a more positional player. There's obviously a lot more research and a lot more data that goes into this number, but essentially you can get a score for every single team and every single manager. And this makes a little bit more sense when you consider the list of managers and where they're considered on this spectrum. And for example, right at the top with the highest relational score, you have a manager like Fernando Diniz at Fluminense. Players rotate freely around the pitch and are not fixed to any specific position. But if we go all the way down to the end of this list, so managers that have a more positional nature, we have Ruben Amorim. There is actually one manager that, according to this research, is more positional in nature compared to Ruben Amorim, and I want to know if you can guess who it is in the comments down below. So with Sporting, Amorim had a horizontal relational score of 0, which essentially means that the players are a little bit more fluid vertically, but horizontally they are in their fixed positions. And this is very clear when you watch Sporting play. There is a very clear 3-2-4-1 structure when in possession, and the players' rotations are very fixed, and one of the reasons why it's not quite working with Man United just yet. So if we take a look at where Ten Hag placed on this list, then we can see that Amorim has a lot of work to do if he wants to bring these numbers down to something that he's more comfortable with to make his system work more effectively. So basically what I'm trying to say is that Ruben Amorim's pass maps with Sporting looked something like this. While at Man United, they're currently still looking something like this. And there's 3 areas that they need to work on to make sure that these two start to match a little bit more consistently. This video is also based on the assumption that he is trying to implement the exact same system that he used at Sporting. But in fairness, he has alluded to this in a few times during his press conferences, and he is using the exact same structure in possession, both for build-up and in the final third. So evidence would suggest that he does want to get this Man United team to be as similar to Sporting as possible. And the first thing to touch on is Man United's build-up shape. And we are seeing the same rotation that Amorim was using at Sporting, with one of the centre-backs pushing into midfield. This means that one of the holding midfielders will push further up the pitch, and you essentially end up with 2 players on the defensive line, which does mean that there's a lot of chance of central progression and a lot of third-man layoffs from the striker with the 2 players between the lines, but it's something that Man United are still struggling to exploit consistently. On the other hand, Man United are struggling to deal with an effective high press from the opposition, and in situations where they get caught on the flank, they don't seem comfortable rotating the ball consistently and waiting for the right gap to open up. And essentially, if they move the ball over to the left flank, they seem adamant on moving the ball on that flank and trying to play it forward consistently, rather than building their attacks more slowly and moving the ball from flank to flank, which is something that Amorim did consistently, and they would never get trapped on the flank. They would always try and use the goalkeeper to their advantage and move the ball into an area where then the opposition had to fall back into their mid-block structure or low-block structure. And in fact, with Man United getting caught on the left flank, something that happened quite frequently in their game against Man City was Dalot attempting these extremely dangerous diagonals across the length of the pitch into the opposite wing-back. And it's a pass that even at the low level of football, they tell you not to attempt too often, because if it does get intercepted, which is exactly what happened against Man City, then you're completely exposed in the center of the pitch, and it can lead to a dangerous opportunity. So the first main difference is this, that Man United are trying to rush their attacks a little bit too frequently, and they're not patient enough at the back to set up the right structure. And the right structure is exactly a 3-4-2-1. And we can see in all of these games with Sporting that this is the exact shape that they build their attacks from. They're very slow in possession, they don't rush the ball forward, they wait until all the players are in this position, and then they slowly start to implement their rotations that they want to use. So eventually Man United will adopt this 3-4-2-1 shape and gain more control of the pitch. But again, here we can start to see the biggest differences from Sporting and Man United, and why Amorim is struggling to get the same effectiveness from his rotations. And the first thing to pick up on is that Man United's players are still a little bit too mobile. They're moving around the pitch a little bit too frequently. And as we saw earlier, Sporting are a very positional team, and the players were very fixed to their positions. And their rotations were essentially modular. That, for example, if the ball moves over to the left wing back, then the rotation from the inside forward and the holding midfielder and the striker are more or less the same every time. And it's the same thing if you move over to the right flank, the rotations were more or less the same. But at Man United, the players are a little bit more fluid and they're rotating a little bit too much. You get players like Bruno Fernandes that will pick up positions outside of this half space position. He wants to drop deep, he wants to get time on the ball. But for Amorim, this could be detrimental to his tactics, because in a situation where they move the ball over to the left wing back, they need a player in this position to push an attack into the half space. But if Bruno Fernandes wants time on the ball and is in a position here, then a ball over to the wing back will simply just be met by pressure, and there's no chance for them to build a successful attack. And that leads us nicely to the second main challenge that Amorim is facing, and that is the positioning of the wingbacks. Now, if you look at Sporting, you can see the wingbacks are basically never on the defensive line if the ball is moving over to their flank. They drop quite far off the defensive line, and this space in behind the fullback is a crucial space that they want to exploit. It's a space that was always attacked by the inside forward or by Gyökeres moving over or attacking on the opposite flank. And at Man United, we're still not getting the same level of attacks into this space here because the wingbacks are playing in quite an advanced position. Specifically on the left, if the ball moves over to Dalot, he is almost always already on the defensive line. So it's much harder for Man United to exploit this space in behind the defense because the defensive line has had to push back already to stop these runs from happening. So it's a lot harder for them to exploit this space on the wing, and they find themselves moving the ball back and attempting another move. This rotation does seem to work a little bit better on the right flank, with Mazraoui and Diallo attacking the space more consistently. And it's the same thing when you get these switches in play from Man United. Man United will often build their attacks on the right flank, and when they're trying to switch play into the wing back, they're trying to go to feet. But in reality, from a position like this is when the wing backs would attack forward for Sporting. And you do get situations where the wing backs would attack forward in behind the defensive line, but their runs and their positioning is starting from a much deeper position compared to what is happening at Man United. So the players being a little bit too fluid in nature and the wingbacks being a bit too aggressive when in possession does mean Man United don't have the same level of control in midfield that you did see from teams like Sporting. But even in the final third, the spaces that they wanted to exploit are different to what Amorim was able to implement with Sporting. And in a situation where they're able to build the attack and find themselves out wide, you find Man United often laying the ball off onto the edge of the box and crossing it onto the back post, which is an extremely common approach that teams use a lot in the modern game. But with Amorim, if you take a look at how he wants to create his chances in the final third, a lot of it comes from a big central cluster of players outside the box. And they're not necessarily crossing it into the box, but they want to play through these players as much as possible. If the wingers are cutting inside, then it's more likely that they're going to shoot from this position rather than crossing. And if the ball gets laid off onto the edge of the box, then they're looking for through balls and passes into the center for the striker or the inside forwards to finish off the move from a more dangerous position. Okay, so these are just some of the differences that I've noticed between how Amorim was playing with Sporting and why he might be struggling to implement it successfully at Man United. Now, obviously, this isn't meant to be a critique on any of Amorim's tactics or the players at his disposal, and I am curious to see what players he brings in January to try and make his system work. But what do you think of Ruben Amorim's start at Man United, and how far do you think he's going to take this team? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below.